Imagine a business where employees bypass procedures just to get things done, single individuals can approve their own expenses with no oversight, and managers simply hope nothing goes wrong. Risk? What risk? Once a business identifies applicable risks, we have to identify how to deal with them. Welcome back to this series on the 17 principles of the COSO Internal Control Integrated Framework, where we break down each principle in plain language and connect it to real business, risk, audit, and governance situations. In this clip, we're looking at Principle 10, which sits under the control activities component. We've established our control environment, we've identified our risks, now it's time to do something about them. Principle 10 states that the organization selects and develops control activities that contribute to the mitigation of risks to the achievement of objectives to acceptable levels. Essentially, this principle is the active turning point where an organization moves from merely identifying risks to specifying a risk treatment plan: mitigate, transfer, accept, or avoid. In plain language, this means Principle 10 is the practical action plan for keeping an organization safe. Think of it this way: once a company maps out what could go wrong, it doesn't just write down abstract rules or hope for the best. It embeds specific everyday checkpoints directly into the workflow, like requiring 2 signatures for large expenses or using software that blocks unauthorized access to keep the company on track. Principle 10 is the first principle in the control activities component. It functions as the kickoff point, building a sequential and reinforcing architecture with its neighboring principles. While Principle 10 dictates the structural and operational design of interventions to establish the baseline actions needed to mitigate risks, Principle 11 complements it by focusing on the technology environment, ensuring that the IT infrastructure housing these controls remains secure and stable. Then Principle 12 takes the controls selected under Principle 10 and formally operationalizes them through the policies and procedures, translating theoretical concepts into documented mandatory daily routines that establish clear behavioral expectations for personnel. 3 COSO objectives, operations, reporting, and compliance, are the 3 categories that organizational objectives typically fit into. Let's look at how this principle applies across such objectives. For operational objectives, Principle 10 applies by optimizing workflows and safeguarding resources from waste and abuse. Applying the cost-benefit principle, it ensures that the cost of an operational control does not outweigh the risk's financial impact. This might look like automated inventory tracking or predictive maintenance scheduling to keep operations lean, resilient, and undisrupted. For reporting objectives, controls are engineered to ensure data integrity and prevent cognitive biases or deliberate manipulation from distorting financial and non-financial statements. Grounded in agency theory, these controls minimize the opportunity for managers to manipulate metrics to mislead stakeholders, utilizing activities like strict reconciliations, system validation checks, and data lineage tracking. For compliance objectives, Principle 10 translates complex mandates into binary operational boundaries. To comply with environmental regulations or data privacy laws, control activities are designed to mandate specific authorizations or system blocks, reducing compliance risk to an acceptable level to prevent legal penalties and reputational damage. Weaknesses in this area can result in systemic, cultural, and operational failures. It can cause a theatre of compliance, where controls are selected arbitrarily rather than being mapped to true risks, resulting in bureaucratic, low-value checks that frustrate employees without actually reducing risk. It can also trigger control fatigue. Where controls are overly complex or poorly integrated, employees face cognitive overload, leading to human error or active circumvention to maintain productivity. Most dangerously, a weak application can result in fraud and error materialization. Without a deliberate mix of controls like segregation of duties, a single individual can gain the power to perpetrate and conceal errors or fraudulent acts, leaving the entity vulnerable to asset misappropriation or severe reporting misstatements. Let's look at some controls that help to apply this principle. Management could mandate the use of a unified, standardized risk and control matrix template across all business units. This template structurally forces teams to fill out predefined fields, linking every proposed control activity back to a recognized financial, operational, or compliance risk, preventing the arbitrary selection of isolated controls. In a system change or process engineering project, the respective ITIL or project management framework often requires a signed internal control sign-off. where business process owners and IT project managers must complete a checklist validating that internal controls have been embedded into the new design before it goes live. Automated control attestation workflows are campaigns usually run through the company's GRC tool that periodically push active controls out to their designated owners, who formally certify in the system that the control design remains active, appropriate, and aligned with current operational realities. As part of the annual board-approved audit plan, the internal audit function could review selected business process areas to test the design adequacy of their controls. They can independently verify that management's selected checkpoints have a logical causal link that lowers the impact or likelihood of the respective risk to an acceptable level. Executive management could conduct scheduled quarterly performance and operational review meetings, systematically reviewing key application exception logs, unauthorized override alerts, and operational failures to identify processes where control activities are not operating effectively or being circumvented. A documented audit deficiency remediation and root cause correction process would serve as a corrective measure, sometimes run by a second line of defense function, which keeps track of any control design deficiency flagged by internal or external auditors and associated agreed actions. This helps make sure that issues are dealt with timely and comprehensively. A risk transfer strategy might be third-party co-sourcing or advisory services. Management can engage an external risk advisory or CPA firm to evaluate, benchmark, and co-source the validation of the control framework design. This shifts the operational resource constraints and specialized risk architecture training risks onto an expert third party under contract. An organization that does this well might have a dynamic, living risk and control matrix that explicitly maps organizational objectives to risks and risks directly to active controls, establishing an unbroken, traceable lineage. System configuration reports would demonstrate automated control design, and operational effectiveness could be demonstrated from application logs. You'd see historically clean segregation of duties conflict reports, proving that conflicts are actively monitored and remediated with zero unauthorized bypasses. They could have data-driven control review documentation, such as meeting minutes and analytics reports, showing that management regularly evaluates the environment to decommission redundant manual controls and scale automated checkpoints. For management, this principle requires shifting from passive oversight to active architecture and behavioral design. Management must actively own the design of a defense-in-depth architecture, balance the control environment using the cost-benefit principle so it doesn't choke operational velocity, aggressively automate manual checkpoints to eliminate human fatigue, and provide clear, unambiguous policies so employees understand the why and the how of every control. For auditors, Principle 10 demands critical thinking that goes beyond ticking boxes. Before testing whether a control is operating effectively, auditors must critically evaluate its design effectiveness to ensure it possesses a causal relationship capable of reducing the inherent risk to an acceptable residual risk level. They must evaluate the control mix holistically to ensure management isn't over-reliant on detective controls rather than more robust preventative measures, and they must challenge redundancy by identifying bloated, overlapping manual controls that add cost and friction without providing additional risk mitigation. For the board, this principle provides the actual mechanics for fiduciary oversight and governance. The board must ask management tough questions to verify alignment with risk appetite, ensuring that selected control activities logically reduce residual risks to approved tolerance levels. They must demand holistic accountability by confirming mechanisms like segregation of duties are non-negotiable, and they must oversee framework synergies, ensuring management aligns these control activities with broader international frameworks like ISO 31000 for risk treatment, or NIST, and ISO 27001 for cybersecurity. The key takeaway is that controls should never exist for the sake of having rules. They must be a purposeful, traceable, and optimized shield that directly connects your daily operations to your highest organizational goals. Thanks for joining me in this exploration of COSO ICIF Principle 10. Leave a comment below and click the button if you found this useful, and subscribe to my channel for more videos on this topic. The next video will look at Principle 11, where we peek into the world of IT general controls.